Hello and welcome to your weekend morning brew, a more languid, laid back, slow listening podcast with me, your host, Shivraj Parshad. I'm hoping you will add us to your weekend playlist and give us a listen. That's an audio clip from Lockdown Song, a playful tune composed and performed by singer-songwriter and composer Sonam Kalra. I wish I could show you the video. It's quirky too, as Sonam sits on a sunny day in her lawn lamenting the hardships artists face with lockdowns and this pandemic. I present to you a sonnet with Sonam. Yes, it has a ring to it and pretty much sums up this conversation with Sonam, who leads the multi-genre Sufi gospel project and joins me today. Sonam, I am so excited. You are the first guest on my weekend playlist.
Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you so much, Shivraj. And it's lovely to be here. And I have to say, I loved the name Sonnet with Sonam. I feel like I'm going to request the use of it at some point. I'm not sure when, but I might ask you if I can share the title for perhaps a concert that I do or something interesting.
Thank you so much. And clearly, Sonam, you're not one to shy away from speaking up for a cause. Tell us more about the genesis of the Lockdown Song.
Well, lockdown is interesting because, I kept listening to the way everyone sort of, it was being colloquially used by, say, our drivers or the vegetable seller, and they kept saying, Kya kare ma'am, lockdown hai. And I thought, how apt is that? Because it's not just a lockdown, but people are really down, and everyone was depressed by what was going on. There was no sort of end in sight, and even more so now. But I think when it started, people were also worried about their livelihoods. And you know what happened to the migrant workers, you know what happened to musicians. So many people were affected. Students, their studies were affected. So I think I started wanting to talk about that. I did sing for a few charities. One was for Safe in India, which helped raise funds for migrant workers. I also sang for Vidya schools, which helped raise funds for slum children who go to school in Vidya schools and help them get devices so that they could study at home. But I did realize, Shivraj, that no attention was being paid to the plight of musicians.
Exactly.
They listed last on the list of non-essential services. And I was just appalled that this could happen, because I would like anyone or the powers that be to try and spend maybe 2 hours without music in their lives. Every Indian that we know wakes up to listen to some form of bhajan or chant or some kind of, religious music in the morning, because we are a country that is deeply rooted in faith. We are a country that's so rich in craft and textile. Even what we wear, are pieces of art, whether it's khadi or whether it's an old kantha sari or a dupatta or anything, pure cotton, right? It's all they're beautiful forms of art, and we're surrounded by art in everything that we do. So how could you actually take a huge community and something that
Exactly.
India's identity is its wealth of art and craft. How could you take that and just list it as a cold, non-essential service? And I think that's what really got to me. And of course, I also got annoyed by the fact that people felt that this was the perfect time to exploit artists, where they would ring you up, and not just me. I'm still able to handle this, but they would call you up and they'd say, oh, we'll give you exposure. And, so I started talking about all these things in the Lockdown Song, which is why I say, there's one of the verses which says, free mein gavo ji, exposure milega, are khane ki chinta kahe pet hawa se bharega. The old adage of all artists must live on love and fresh air, and you are so noble if you do art. All of that is true, but at the end of the day, artists have to survive. And these very skilled hands were sitting at home. These people who'd been mastering the art of like playing a beautiful instrument, or hours into honing their skill. What was everyone doing now? And so I think it needed to be said, and I wanted to be, like you said, I've always used my voice, whether it was for speaking out for women's rights or for animal rights, or generally trying to sometimes invoke compassion in people and sometimes just call them out and tell them that they need to be compassionate. I think I've always felt that if I have a voice, then I must use it judiciously, as Faiz Sahab said, right? Bol ke lab azad hain tere, bol zaba ab tak teri hai. The strongest tool that you have at your disposal is your voice, and you must use it judiciously for good to speak out against injustice.
Exactly, Sonam. And I think there's a lot to be discussed on your cause related work, and we will touch upon that and all that you're planning for the future, because clearly you're not someone to sit down and take things quietly. But what most people may not know is that you have a really funny bone. What makes it tick?
A wicked side, right? I don't know what makes it tick could be hard. I think almost everything makes it tick. Conversations like this one that I'm having with you, conversations, funny people that I meet, interesting people. I think that I grew up in a house which was filled with creativity and fun and a liberal, like my father was so liberal, my mother was liberal, everything was encouraged, the arts were encouraged, free speech, free thinking was encouraged. I'm one of three girls, I'm the youngest daughter, and my father always told us that, look, you're not equal to boys, you're way better. And we've always believed we are.
That's
And forget
fabulous.
believing, we know, I'm kidding. But the point is, growing up in a house where you were so encouraged, it was like the perfect environment for nurturing creativity, individuality, like I said, voice, and to find your own path, to stay grounded, to stay understand humility, the importance of humility, of compassion, of kindness, of giving. So all of that makes, I think, me tick. And makes my funny bone tick, of course, parents. My dad had a really lovely twinkle in his eye. He was funny. My mother was funny. They dealt with everything with humor. We were a bit self-effacing. We all are. I have two elder sisters, but I think also just trying to find joy. There's a childlike quality which I feel I saw my mother and father both have, and I made sure. I think I just it's there in all of us genetically, but I think we also work hard to retain it, to find great joy in everything. And the ability to see the lighter side in life is so important for all of us. Otherwise, we just take ourselves too seriously.
Now, I'm going to go back to the past because I remember meeting you many, many years ago. You worked in advertising and you were very creative. And I remember when you used to meet my father, who also had a wicked sense of humor, you also had a really wicked sense of humor and such a great voice to boot. There are some things I did find on my cloud, and I know I can't play them because they're not really age appropriate that you sent around in the days before WhatsApp. But if I could ask you to maybe do one or two impersonations or impressions.
I guess, I've always used my voice has pretty much been my identity. So there have been things like I used to watch a lot of Bart Simpson growing up. So I could do a Bart Simpson impersonation, which would be pretty much like this. It was like, hey, what's happening, dude? I'm the guy who likes to be rude, terrorizing the neighborhood. Lisa, Lisa. So there was Bart. Then there was also the fact that I liked doing, like I said, all kinds of impersonations. So I think one night when my husband was asleep and I couldn't sleep, I took his telephone and I recorded this character who just popped into my head at the time. And I think we used to get a lot of us. We still get these calls where people call and they're trying to sell you everything from the moon, right, to
Right.
I think a used car. So this woman, I mean, in my head, I recorded this character called Sheetal, where she said, "Hello, गुड आफ्टरनून सर, मैं शीतल बोल रही हूँ ICICI बैंक से। पता करना था आपको लोन तो नहीं चाहिए, हाउस, कार, एयरप्लेन, किसी चीज़ के लिए? नहीं सर, आपको कोई कबाब, कचौड़ी तो नहीं चाहिए? होम डिलीवरी है हमारे पास, VCD, DVD." So I went on to do this. I'm not going to finish this because eventually she keeps asking for
Exactly.
all the way, to the well, and right at the end, the very risque act of sex. But um, uh, I recorded this, and when my husband was asleep, I made it his phone ring. I forgot to
Oh,
tell him that I'd done that. And he used to work with Discovery Channel, and he was sitting in a board meeting the next day, fortunately, with just everyone from the office, and there was no one from out of the country there. They wouldn't have understood anyway, but he was sitting there, and they were all talking about this really serious marketing budget, and they could all hear this voice of this woman, this, telecaller going, "Hello, good afternoon, sir." And they were looking around saying, who's switched their telephone on and what's going on? And as it turned out, my husband then suddenly realized there was his phone that was vibrating. He came home and he said, "What did you do?" I was like, "Oh, I'm so sorry, I forgot to tell you." But Shivraj, to his credit, I think that was, I don't even know, maybe 15 or 20 years ago. And he still has the same phone ring. So we can still be at a party. we'll still be in a doctor's room, we'll still be somewhere where this voice will go, hello, and you can see the look on people's faces like, where is this person emerged from? So, yeah. And of course, then there was another one called Priyatam, but that is totally, I think, R-rated.
Of,
So, yeah,
yes.
we're not going to go there.
So, when did the love for music really take over? Enough to quit your full time job and just do this?
So, I think it started when I was very young. I mean, I loved music, and my mother saw that I loved music, possibly even before I did. So, I started learning at the age of 4. I started very
Wow.
young. I learned, from everyone, from a Guruji who came to the house. I would go to some people, and I did it, and I was doing it in school. But I think I was always a bit not shy, but I had a different tone of voice, right? I had a deep voice, which was not that easily accepted in India. My dog's voices you'll hear now. I think since we're talking about voices, they were feeling a bit left out, I guess. They have very deep voices as well.
Very, very vocal as well.
I'm going to call out to them just a second. Garbar. So Garbar doesn't mean trouble. It's actually one of my dog's names. So you know the names. So there's
Yeah.
Garbar, Chutney, Ladka, Ladki, and Chokra, which is also, we're talking about being creative. So there you go. But coming back to the voice, I always felt like I had a really different voice. It was a deep voice. It was, people were always surprised when they heard this very tiny little girl who had a big, deep voice. The nice thing was that my music teacher in school was really, really encouraging, both junior school and senior school. And so I played the harmonium. I sang in the school inter-school competitions and all of that. But I don't think I trusted myself enough. And then I went to art school and I completely gave up singing, which I mean, I gave up studying it seriously because art school also required the sort of time. It wasn't like regular college. We went from 9 to 5 and we worked weekends, for submissions. But the great thing about being in art school was that everyone sang, everyone had another,
Exactly.
artists have like other sides to them. So everyone sang and there was always music in the canteen. And so that sort of kept it alive. And then I joined advertising, and soon into advertising, maybe a couple of years into advertising, I found Shubhaji as well. But before Shubhaji, sorry, I go back a little bit to say that around the 8th standard, I started learning from the Daga brothers, and they were obviously the exponents of Drupad. And I started learning from them. And that was a beautiful time for me because it was a very pure time of
Hmm.
Guru Shishya love, and also just devotion from the Guru to the student. Even not, it's one thing to have a student that's devoted to the Guru, but my Gurus were so kind.
Wow.
Unfortunately, I lost one Guru, and then his elder brother started to teach me, and tragically he died as well. They died very soon, quickly, within, but I think it was just a time span of about 2 years possibly. After college, as I said, I restarted learning from Shubhaji, and that was a lovely time as well. And I think that's the time I joined advertising. By then, again, the kind of hours I had to give advertising, it was, because advertising, especially when you're in creative, and this,
It's long hours.
yeah, right, it's long hours, and it's more than long hours. It's all, I think, everything, your head, your mind, your heart is into creating an ad, or you have to throw yourself into it completely. So it's hard to
Exactly.
throw yourself into two things, even though I was managing, but I don't think I was doing my music enough justice. And at some point near the turn of the millennium, I just decided I was going to quit, and I was going to start give this a shot, try and do this seriously and see if I could do it seriously, because I had to give it that chance. And as soon as I quit, I think we spoke about this just before the interview started. I lost my voice. I lost my voice.
Oh no.
Yeah, I lost my voice. I quit, and 2 months into this, I lost my voice. I got laryngitis, a very severe case. Then I got pharyngitis. I got nodules, you name it. So pretty much for a year, it was up and down. But I kind of had this interesting conversation going on in my head where I didn't get disheartened, because I sort of felt like Saraswati, the goddess of music, was just testing me. And she was saying, okay, let me see. Now you've done this, you've quit, but let's see how serious you really are about this.
So really testing you.
Yeah, and I used to have this conversation with her, and I would say, I'm going to prove to you that I am really serious about this. I also got asked by a couple of, in fact, one really great graphic design house to start writing for them. So it was interesting because I was able to still do advertising writing. Of course, you don't know the other shift, Shivraj. When I went to art school, I trained to be a graphic designer. When I joined
Wow.
advertising, I joined as a graphic designer. A year into being a graphic designer, I didn't like the fact that I was treated, I was given these ads that someone else would,
To just execute.
yeah, and else would create them. So I thought, no,
Hmm.
I want to be at the birth of the idea. I want to be at the
Yeah.
beginning of the ideation process. And so I said to my boss, I can write. And he said, no, you can't. I mean, you've been to art school and you've done this degree. And I said, look, I can do both. And I forced him to do a test where the writer and I would both be given the same brief and we would write the ads together. And I said, you just have to do the blind test. We will both hand you the ads together. You will not know which one has written which ad. And you have to choose. And mine won. And that's how I got a chance to start writing. So it was, really great that all these lovely things, because I kind of pushed the boundaries a little bit, started to happen. So even with music, I thought I'd only take 3 months off, but even though I lost my voice, I decided no, I was going to stay at it, and lovely things started happening for me. Like I said, I started freelance writing. I got to do television shows. A couple of television companies reached out and asked if I wanted to host travel shows. I think I hosted two travel shows and I hosted a car show where I test drove
Wow.
cars like Jeremy Clarkson in BBC Wheels. In fact, this was called BBC Wheels, like Jeremy Clarkson in Top Gear. I test drove cars. I did travel shows. I traveled around India for the BBC and for Star Plus. So, I think that because I opened myself up to experiences, because I said I will stay the course. Nothing sort of other stuff started to happen, which helped me come back. And a year later, my voice was back, and I was able to restart. And of course, it wasn't easy even then, because 2 years went by beautifully, and then my mother got cancer, and she was detected with lung cancer, stage 4, and that was the
Oh
hardest
no.
time of my life. And I think that whole year again, I was so determined to make sure she would get well, even though she was given 4 months. Neither her, nor my father, nor my family, my sisters, nor I were ready to have her go. So we worked very hard, and she was just incredible. She beat it for 8 years. And that's really, I always talk about that, because I think that it just proves that if you really, really have faith, you can move mountains, to quote the Bible.
And I remember when you used to perform jazz and gospel, this is a story you would tell us, and you said that perhaps your mother was one of your greatest influences. Isn't that right?
100%. I mean, my mother was one of my greatest influences. Like I said, I was so fortunate to have. I can only wish and pray that every child has the kind of childhood I had. My house was filled with happiness. It was an open house for all our friends. Every one of our friends chose to come to our house rather than go home to
Hmm.
their own parents, because it was a house that was so lovely and fun and democratic in so many ways, and where children were not only made to feel like they were seen, and that they were people, which is so important, and that they had a place where they could talk, a safe space. So many of my friends shared their problems with my parents, and my mother was so encouraging of my voice. And even though there were so many times, Shivraj, where, like I said, I had a different voice. I'm a perfectionist, so I was very critical of myself. I think that she was just so amazing. She used to say to me, she used to say, when you sing, I cry. And I used to joke with her, and I used to say, that's because I sing so badly or whatever. But, she was so encouraging. And it was just, she was such an incredible person, even through her cancer. I mean, I often quote the fact that I remember when, towards her last few months, when she was so sick, she had the ability even then to see light and darkness. I mean, she called me to her bedside and she said, Sony, look at that squirrel, and, look at that bird. It looks like it's talking to the squirrel. She could see stuff like that. When you're in agony, you're in pain, you could still
Hmm.
see joy. She used to write poetry when she lost the use of her hand because of a tumor in the brain that had spread to the brain. She used to use one of those Nokia phones. Sorry about this. So my mother learned to use her mobile phone, which was like those Nokia phones. She would write her haikus and her poems on her phone, and
Wow.
that's the ability to continue to see joy, even in darkness. And so, yes, one of my greatest inspirations for sure. And my father also, who never, ever, ever quit, Shivraj. He had this incredible poster that used to be up in his room. And I remember seeing this growing up. And it was this very famous one. It said about not quitting. It's like,
Hmm.
when things seem rough, as they sometimes will, when the road you're trudging seems all uphill, when the funds are low and the debts are high, and you want to sigh, but you have to, and you want to smile, but you have to sigh. Rest if you
Mm.
must, but don't you quit. I'm not remembering it completely, but it was these beautiful words, and I always think, he kept it there because he was able to reinvent himself after he quit his railway job. He started his own business. He never gave up, and that was something that I learned from him.
And Sonam, when I hear you perform or watch you perform rather, I do get that sense that it is deeply personal. And then came the Sufi gospel project, such an interesting confluence of musical genres, spiritual influences. People who don't know, how did that happen? And would you say that that was a turning point?
So it's hard. There's so many turning points, right? I think in all our life.
Right.
I think when I was 20 or 21, when my father, I think I was 20 when my father had his second cardiac arrest, and that was a very serious one. And I remember him not being in Delhi when that happened. He was in Bangladesh, and it was so weird. My mother showed up at my college, and she used to drop by quite often because my college was on Bhagwan Das Road, and my grandmother was in Firoz Shah Road. So every time she was driving by, she'd drop something or whatever. So it was just a routine visit. But I remember running down the stairs when someone said, "Your mother's come," and as soon as I reached her, I said, "What's wrong with Dad?" It's like I knew. And before
Mhm.
he'd left on this trip, I had been worried. So I think when in your 20s your father has a near death experience, and then that went on to be really very serious because he got okay, his heart got okay, but before he was about to be released from hospital, he started a massive gastrointestinal bleed. He was in hospital for 3 months. It was so touch and go. Mostly everything we'd hear from the doctors is that he's not going to make it. And he, 3 months,
Mm.
I mean, he lost 72 units of, he was replenished with 72 units of blood, plasma, not even blood. So, I mean, it was crazy and chaotic. And he was an absolute miracle when he survived. Even now, the doctors talk about it. But that was a turning point in my 20s when I realized what really mattered in life. I think all the small stuff that I used to fret, I realized that
Mhm.
none of that really matters. All that really matters is to have the people that you love with you, the love of your parents, that they're your whole
Mhm.
world at that age anyway. And I think they always are in so many ways. I realized that. Then my mother falling ill. I think for me, I've always had faith in God from the time I was a little child. The faith has changed in as much the understanding that I have of God keeps changing as you grow older. When you're very young, it's so absolute. When you grow older, it's one of acceptance and of a different kind of understanding. But I think when I really did want to, through my music, because I'd been through so much with my parents, when I started singing finally, after mom got better, I found I was just singing Amazing Grace. And it was weird because I hadn't grown up listening to Amazing Grace. I didn't go to a convent school. It wasn't one of my prayer songs. But I just kept on repeating it. And I felt like maybe one of the things I've always done, Shivraj, is to listen to my inner voice, to listen to just listen, open my ears.
Yeah. And listening is so important to your creativity.
Yeah, and to listen to what's around you, to listen to science, to listen for science, to listen to conversations, to what people have to say. And it's so important for all of us because how do you assimilate if you're not listening, if you're not soaking in? I started listening to the fact that I was singing Amazing Grace repeatedly, and I thought maybe I needed to do something with it. And so I think very soon after, I started sort of singing it on repeat mode almost. I happened to be on holiday in Singapore, and I passed a music school on my first day, and I thought, why don't I just go to that music school and I asked them if there's a teacher there who can teach me gospel music or Amazing Grace. And they did have a teacher, and we did get started. I walked into that school expecting to find, you think gospel, and we're all so used to typecasting, right? And it's something you
Mhm.
catch yourself doing as well, even if you don't want to. And so I thought, I'll have an African American teacher teaching me gospel music. There was this big black gentleman who very politely said, "Yes, we have a slot." And I just assumed the class would be with him. And I then walked into the room 10 minutes later, and it was with this young, red-headed girl who had freckles all over her face, and she was 10 years younger than me. So every possible stereotype I had, she was the opposite of that. And she turned out to be one of my loveliest teachers. So I continue to learn. And one of the lovely things about, I think, being a Sikh, do you know that it means, Sikh means student, right? So as a Sikh, you are also always a student. Anyway, so I started learning from her, and then I came back and I would save money and go back and learn again. And so I discovered a lot of gospel music through her, which I wanted to learn. But through her, I discovered jazz as well, because she started introducing me to more and more jazz. And then I wanted to do Broadway because I was interested. So strangely enough, despite having studied Indian classical music through my entire life, my first concert was one that I called Notes from Here and There, where I did a selection of gospel, Broadway, and jazz. And I think that was surprising to me, but it was lovely because it was everything I wanted to sing at that time. It's everything I needed to sing at the time to heal me, to find my voice. And it was lovely because we just chose a tiny little venue, which was supposed to be 140 max seating, which was a tiny venue at the India Habitat Center, their basement theater. And I think that didn't even advertise it. I must have put up a few posters, sent messages to friends, and we had 300 people. And they were not all
Wow.
300 of my friends who turned up. And I think Habitat had to turn them away because they said, we're not allowed to have that many people. It's a fire hazard. And I remember years later when I eventually did the Sufi Gospel project, which I'll get to and tell you how. But when I asked them for the same theater, because I was debuting a new concept and I was afraid perhaps of how people would respond to it or whether people would even come. And they said, no, I'm sorry, we can't give you the small space. Too many people come for your concerts. We're giving you the 452 seater. And I was so nervous. I said, 452 people? Are you kidding? How am I going to fill the space? And of course, by God's grace, that was sold out. In fact, there also, we couldn't let more people in, and it was amazing. For many years, I became this crazy Sikh girl who was singing Christian music,
Gospel and
gospel
jazz.
and jazz. And people said, like, you belong to the Sikh religion. Why do you sing Christian bhajans? And I would find that just so bizarre because
Christian bhajans.
yeah, and I'd say, how does it matter what way I call out to God in? Because, you know, how do you know if God is male or female or what language God wants to be spoken to? I have to do what feels right. I have to call out to
Hmm.
God in the way that feels right for me. And at this moment, this feels right. That happened, and I did a lot of festivals. And then I think a big turning point would certainly be when I got invited to sing gospel music at the Dargah of Sufi Inayat Khan in Nizamuddin. It was the Urs, which is the birth celebration of the Sufi saint Inayat Khan. And they said, will you come and sing gospel? And I think just that very thought to me, again, I listened to what they said and I listened to where I was. And I thought, a Sikh girl who's singing gospel music, Christian music, in a seemingly Islamic space, now that's got to mean something. And there's got to be a reason I'm
Hmm.
being given this opportunity. And I thought I must do something that is befitting of this opportunity. And that's when I started to think about what I could do. And I think at first what I did was purely based on intuition. I knew the sound I wanted, and I knew I would blend gospel and some, maybe Indian spiritual music. And I called the sarangi player, and I remember when he started playing in my house with me while I sang Abide With Me. That was the first thing we sang together. We played together. I was a mix between just smiling from ear to ear and tears streaming down my face because I just knew that sound intuitively felt right. And
Hmm.
then after that concert performance, people were really moved by that concert, as was I when I was singing it. And for me, another thing, Shivraj, I think a lot of the reactions I have, everything is just, if I get, I call them not goosebumps, but if I get truth bumps when I'm singing something or reading something or saying something, then I know that it's right. So I trust myself to feel. And, if I can continue, if I feel something, then chances are other people will feel it too, because the truth of it will be so real. And so I trust that. I trust that in myself, and I trust that in the people, in my listeners, in my audience, in people around me. I did that concert, and then that last year was rough because it was my mother's last year, and she was sick, so we couldn't do much more. Then my mother passed away, and she used to run a music heritage society which promoted Indian classical music called Sharaj, which is the full form of the first note Sa of Indian classical music. And they asked me to do a tribute concert to her. I was not ready, I think, to sing Indian classical music either because I was so devastated. But I said, let me
Hmm.
sing whatever feels right. And my mother had been saying when she was able to come for that first concert in the Dargah of Sufi Inayat Khan, she'd always said to me that when the music is ready, will you put it all on my iPad so I can listen to it? And so I did all of what I would have put on her iPad for her, and I created it and worked on it. When I did that concert, I think one of my musicians said to me, present this to the world. And I thought, are you serious? You think they really want to hear it? And he said, trust me. When I did that concert at the Dargah of Sufi and Ayat Khan, when I was leaving Nizamuddin, and I remember very distinctly standing, waiting for my husband to come pick me up, I literally heard the words, the Sufi Gospel Project, in my head. And it was almost like it was a gift that had been granted to me because it all sort of made sense at that moment once I'd finished singing it and I was standing there. So I honestly do believe so much of what I've got, so much of what I still receive are revelations, are gifts because I'm listening.
Hmm.
Because I'm keeping my heart open and I'm wanting to receive.
And also, Sonam, I've noticed over the years that apart from that listening, you have mixed and matched legendary lyrics, popular tunes, and sometimes also created amazing original material to really carry forward a social or political message. Is that critical to what you do as a musician and performer?
I think I always wanted to be, and one of the things I said to you, I came back to music quite late, not only because I'm such a perfectionist, I was able to reach a place where I realized truth was more important than just perfection. And I was able to reach that place because of the fact that I also did theater after my mother's first year of cancer. I needed to vent and I wasn't able to sing because I was so heartbroken. So theater really healed me. And I worked very seriously as an actor as well for many, many years. And one of the things that my teacher, my director, Amal Alana, who was the chairperson of the National School of Drama at the time and had her own repertory, which I was a part of, she said that, to be able to find beauty, there has to be truth in the moment. And I still
Mm,
carry these words with me because it is so, so true that you can, so often, Shivraj, you will find a perfectly arranged, perfectly auto tuned, pitch perfect song that sounds gorgeous, but it leaves you cold. And at the
mm.
same time, you'll walk past a street musician who's sitting there with this raw voice, this scratchy voice, perhaps not singing in perfect pitch, yet because he or she is telling their own story, you just
You get
can't.
truth bumps,
You get
as you
goose
call them.
bumps. Yes, you're mesmerized and you have tears streaming down their face because they touch something in you which is true as well, which you didn't even know you had, or you didn't even know you were bottling up, right? So
Mm.
to me, I think once I was able to do that, I was also sure, I think, that my music had to have a message. It had to talk about who I was, what I believed in, the change I wanted to see around me. And every time, I've been so lucky to sing in places where this belief has been reinstated. When I sang in Pakistan at Faiz Sahab's Peace Festival,
Wow.
Faiz's first Peace Festival, and I was able to sing his own poetry there. I remember looking at an exhibition of his life, and I had tears streaming down my face even then because
Yeah, so that was my question. I mean, you've traveled the world, performed publicly and in private gigs. And if I were to ask you what your most memorable experiences was, would that Pakistan trip really qualify? Because, when I went to Pakistan, for instance, and I went to the Iqbal Lama tomb, it brought back a lot of memories because our school song was Lap Pe Aati Hai. And we forget that Sare Jahan Se Acha was also his, right?
yeah, Sare Jahan Se Acha is absolutely his. But the thing is, it's hard for me when you ask me what my most memorable is. There have been so many. I mean, there was Jahan-e Khusro, where I got to climb onto the same stage and sing
Wow.
before Abida ji and get a standing ovation. I mean, I was certain that I was going to sing before Abida ji, and I would pale in comparison. I was nervous, and she, of course, was the most incredible human being because I met her before to take her blessings, and I have never met someone who has blessed me with the kind of love that she did. And I got onto that stage, and I remember the minute I put my first step onto that stage, I knew my whole world was in equilibrium for that hour that I sang, hour
Wow.
and a half. There's been that. There's been singing in front of the pyramids. I mean, never in my wildest dreams that I
Wow.
imagined I would do that. There was singing at the Sydney Opera House. I mean, to have a standing ovation in the Sydney Opera House on the eve of my mother's birthday, what could be more beautiful? It was a perfect tribute to her. My first concert, where I sang at the India Habitat Center when I presented the Sufi Gospel Project, and we got a standing ovation. And when it ended, everyone went silent, and there was this perfectly choreographed, orchestrated moment almost by God, where an old lady says loud enough for the entire audience to hear in that moment of silence. She says, "Straight from your lips to God's heart, my child." And again, I felt like my mother had heard me from heaven. So, there have been, and of course, fairs to go to Pakistan, to cross the border by foot, to stand there with one foot on either side, to realize the futility of partition, and then to have that moment, to be able to go there to perform Faiz Sahab's music, to get the kind of love we got in Pakistan, the understanding. I mean, every single moment, Shivraj, even the lockdown song, to be able to do it myself on the terrace of my house, shoot
Mm.
everything, put my phone into the refrigerator because it kept heating up. I mean, every moment, big or small, in this journey is memorable. So it's when people say, what was your best concert? I said this entire gift of music from the time that I've started singing publicly or believed that I am a musician and taken it on seriously. Every bit of that has been memorable. Not to mention the fact that as memorable has been my memory of sitting in my mother's lap when I was 4 years old, This
Mm.
Begum Akhtar on those old spool records, and that chair is still in my room. I mean, I was sitting on it 5 minutes ago when I was talking to you, and I just moved because the dogs were barking. But everything, I think music has made every memory that attached to it memorable and given me so much that I can, it would be, I don't even think the word grateful does it justice.
But it is really a project for you now, and it's something that's grown so popular. And I can see that it consumes almost every pore of you. Yet you juggle this with your 6 kids and an entrepreneurial husband, and then this situation we find ourselves in. Now, of course, our listeners must be wondering, oh my God, she has 6 kids. Can you explain to us what I meant
Yes.
by that?
So I have six beautiful children. All six of them were four legged to start with. Now one of them stands on her two legs. She's no longer crawling. But the remaining five still are four legged because they're doggies. My dog babies are Garbar, Chutney, Ladka, Ladki, and Chokra. And my little daughter is called Noor. And they are exactly my children. I think I got asked very early on when Noor was born. I got
Hmm.
asked by, let me not say typical because that's unfair, but other moms who perhaps don't understand what it's like to be a dog mother, and I know you get it. But I
Hmm.
got asked, how does it feel to be a mother now, Sonam? And I very politely said, I said, look, no offense to you, but I've always been a mother and I don't appreciate this question. And they looked at me a bit surprised. They said, no, but what do you mean? I said, as far as my earliest photograph is of me when I think I'm 6 months or 8 months and I've just learned to sit and in my lap on the garden in front of me are lots of little puppies. And you can see the absolute joy on my face.
Mm.
And that's how I've always felt about dogs. And so I said, I've always been a mother. And then it made me think, of course they told me that no, it's not the same thing. I said, look, for you maybe it isn't, but it's you who don't get to
Mm.
decide
That's
for
sacrilegious.
me. You don't get to decide for me that I'm going to feel differently. So for me it is. So they said no, and I said, no, I'm sorry, I don't accept this. For me it really is the same thing. But then it also made me think, Shivraj, that why is it that everything, and this is what we like to do as people, and this is again one of the things that I try and break with the Sufi Gospel Project, this horrible habit that we have of labeling things, that you are Hindu,
Mm.
you are Sikh, you are Muslim, you are straight, you are gay, you are a mother, you are a working woman, you're a housewife, all these horrible things that we tend to, and
Mm.
I say they're horrible not because they're bad in themselves as labels, they tend to box you in. I mean,
Mm.
why can't you be, for example, you can be a housewife and you can be gay and you can be a rap star. You know what I mean? You can be many things.
Mm.
Who decides that we only get to be one thing at once? Which is why the Sufi Gospel Project isn't one thing at once. And for me, I realized we've all, in some ways, at least I know from personal experience, and I know there are many like me, you're a fantastic dog mother, right? I know we've
Mm.
all been mothers in so many ways. I have been a mother to so many
Exactly.
friends. As we grow older, we become mothers to our own mothers. So
Mm.
who decides when you become a mother? So even that as a statement, what does it feel like to be a mother? I said, I've always been a mother. You can have a maternal instinct from the time you're born, and sometimes you can have no maternal instinct, and that's
And
okay.
sometimes it nurtures your creativity as well.
Yeah, and you can have no maternal instinct, and that doesn't make you a bad person either.
And I can see some of them are musical too because they can sense we're talking about music.
Yeah, and they know we're talking about them. So they're saying, yes, yes, she's our mama, she's our mama. I think they're letting you know that. Yeah.
So, so let's return to the original theme of this conversation, the lockdown and what it's done to the creative community. First up,
Yeah.
how have these past 6 months been for you?
They've been interesting. I think for the most part, if I had to look at them objectively, I would say they've been great for the simple reason that I've been forced to learn stuff that I always thought I didn't have the time for, or I was intimidated by. Sometimes you just, because we all live in a world which is so technology heavy, we feel like
Mhm.
we can only imbibe that much stuff, right? We're like, no, 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 I don't want to learn this. I'll just outsource it to someone. And you
Mm.
realized you needed to do it all yourself. There was no outsourcing. So, you know what?
Mm.
And it's been a very good thing because as we grow older, we also tend to feel like, I don't want to learn anything more, which is the worst thing we can do, right?
Worst thing because you stop. I mean, your life stops if you don't learn.
You're comfortable, you're in your comfort zone, you have enough knowledge, you think, I don't need more. But you know what? This was a great reminder that I'm sorry, you know what? Get up, learn more, and do it quickly. So I was fairly quick to get on to understanding technology. At least I knew for a fact that the first month that this happened, and a lot of musicians were going out there doing Facebook lives and all of that, I knew for a fact, Shivraj, that I didn't want to sing off a telephone mic, because I said, after all the
Mm,
years of work that I've put into trying to have a sound that I like, or that I work
mm,
hard to put out, I was not going to be putting out a sound that made me sound like an amateur. And I only say amateur because, at the end of the day, it's a mono mic. It's going to sound, it's going to be treble heavy, it's going to sound sharp. So why should I do that to myself? I would rather not sing for a while than ruin the product that I have created, or the voice that I've worked hard to sort of achieve.
yeah.
So I didn't sing in the beginning. The other main reason I didn't sing so much in the beginning, the first month I'm talking about, is I said we have to stop putting out free content, because the minute as
Mm,
artists we start putting out free content, people love free things. We all do. So
mm,
people are going to say, "Oh, great, we can ask them to keep singing for free." And sure enough, that's exactly what happened. Everybody started asking artists to perform for free. And then if you asked for even a token honorarium, because you understood that everyone was going through COVID and they couldn't pay you the kind of
mm,
fee that
mm.
you actually deserved or demanded, people looked at you and said, "But they're doing it for free." And I said, "But that's not fair to them."
And I remember a social media post you put out just to that effect a while ago on Facebook, where you said, so you're willing to still spend on the accoutrements and the niceties, but you're not willing to pay for people's creativity and contribution to you.
Yeah, and to make your life better. And that, it upsets me that the arts doesn't get the kind of respect it should. Now, it's all
Mm,
very well for people who, fold hands in front of artists and all, but at this time, where has all that gone? Where has it
mm,
all gone when people have made art has made the lockdown livable? You have not been able to engage with people. People
exactly.
have gone back to listening to music, to doing wonderful things that they could. So many people have started learning music. Why do we not understand the value that art adds to your life? You remember those beautiful videos of people singing in Italy to their neighbors? That was art.
Mm,
How did people get through that very hard time when Italy was locked down so badly? It's all art, and we have to understand the value it does. Even when if we stop to think, in schools, how are we taught verses?
mm,
By song, through music. How are we taught our
mm.
multiplication tables in rhythm, by
Rhyme.
rote, by rhyme? So what is all of that? That's art. If you didn't teach it like that, and it would totally, it would not, we wouldn't learn it the way we did. So many programs work with helping people in terms of therapy with music, right? Children with
Mm,
autism. I mean, there is so much
exactly.
scientific finding that says that art helps you. I mean, just basically, that music releases dopamine. That's your happy hormone. So
Mm,
why are they saying that we don't want to spend money on it? I started to see this happen, and very early I saw this trend of people saying free, 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 and artists
mm,
also panicking, thinking, how do we stay relevant? So let's put out everything for free. And I wanted to tell so many of my contemporaries that not to panic and say that, look,
mm,
hold
mm.
on, it's going to get okay, in terms of, if you respect your art, other people will too, right? But I think people just
Yeah, and Sonam, it's particularly tough for talent coming to cities from different parts of the country in search for work. They've been here. It's almost like the migrant workers, right? It's important to give voice to those concerns too.
it is, and like I said, it's fantastic. Teamwork Arts has just done this incredible fundraiser where they've managed to raise 48 lakhs for indigenous
Wow.
artists and musicians. But Shivraj, what was amazing is it was a concert for artists by artists, where all of us came together to help raise funds. But whenever there's a pandemic or a
Mm, mm.
catastrophe, artists raise funds for everything from a cyclone to other charities. Why don't other people raise funds for artists? It's all very well that people, fortunately, at least people donated. So corporates donated, individuals donated, but there should have been much more that was done.
And how are you planning to take that message forward? Because of course, lockdown song happened, the teamwork, big fundraiser happened, and I know you're not someone to sit down and stop. You're someone who always takes things forward.
So I have been doing a lot of, every possible platform that I get a chance to speak, I make sure I talk about this. Every single interview, I make sure, which artists are also listening to, in the hope that they understand that they need to start saying, look, it's time for you to start paying us again, because we have families to feed. I try and talk to my own accompanying musicians, or to people in the community, to say, do the same thing. I do want to get, at some point, also start a series of concerts which we can do, which would be like socially distant concerts. And I've been
Mm,
talking to an event company that might partner with me on this. And in that
wow.
case, we'll be able to start creating safe spaces for people to start attending music concerts again, and trying to find livelihood for musicians again. So hopefully
Yeah.
that will happen. Quickly taught myself technology to make sure that the audio output I gave was as close
Mm-hmm.
to live as I could possibly get it to be. And
Mm-hmm.
that's, I think, when it switched for me. There was a little switch in my head that went off when I realized that this was actually very interesting, because it made me realize I could reach some audiences that I would not
Mm.
possibly have been able to reach. With the partition show that I did, we reached on one show, we reached the UK, the US,
Wow.
and Bangladesh and parts of India. And it was really exciting for me. I said, at least people should also start to feel, because it is depressing to be locked in at home. There's no taking away from that. But if music has to bring you joy, then I said, let me go that extra mile and try and find a way to give them a little more joy. So we've been trying like everyone else, but
New way of things,
yeah,
new way of doing things, and still having the thrill of a live
yeah, and I'm
audience,
still
right?
trying, because for me, I mean, one of the things, early learnings of this lockdown is, you know, uh, understanding what Darwin said, which was the survival of the fittest,
Mm.
not in terms of being competitive, but the survival of the fittest, as in learning to evolve and being kicked out of your comfort zone. It's been a good, and for lack of a better phrase, kick in the butt for everyone, because made us realize a lot of really important things. We've realized we can't sit around, we have to keep learning. We've realized what really matters, that we can live without so much we thought we couldn't live without. We've realized the people and the relationships that really matter. And we've realized the value of life once again, which we had started to take for granted because we got so busy with this onslaught of social media. And the lovely thing is that even though now people are so dependent on technology with Zoom and the podcast you're doing, or say even
Mhm.
Instagram, yet I find many people that I'm speaking to who say, you know what, we've got a no phone hour, or we've got a no computer
Mm.
hour, because they're with their family.
Mm. So, what plans for the future, Sonam? Any new material?
Shivraj, I used to say this earlier. I used to say, don't make plans for the future, because I think I realized at a very early age that you can't decide what the future does for you.
Hmm.
But you do plan. I mean, I have a lot of new songs in the pipeline which I've written, which are half recorded, which I'd recorded before COVID, but I hadn't finished the vocals on. So there are almost 8 songs, believe it or not, which are recorded, and I need to go into the studio. But I haven't been going into the studio because I've been wanting to be careful. I did go in quite recently to record for HCL when they did an HCL concert. So I recorded a live stream, and that was exciting and frightening, because I was with my musicians after 6 months, but we maintained social distance. And so far, touch wood, we're all okay. And when things get better, maybe I'll go into a studio and finish as well the songs that are out there. But there are some beautiful songs, and I say beautiful because I think that their lyric is really of value, with again messages. Whether it's one is a traditional Kabir piece, it's traditional in as much that it's a verse that not many people sing, and I happen to find it again. I keep saying have revelations. I've had this book for years, which was given to me by my wasn't even given. I think my guru was clearing out some of her old books, and I picked it up because I liked the calligraphy on the book. And I said, I'm going to read it one day. And I never did for many years. And one evening, I think I wanted to compose something. So I picked up the book, and I said to myself, I hope I find the poem that I'm looking for, or what I'm meant to find. And I found it. And it was really quite special to be able to find that. The point is, for a musician to not be able to express yourself, that's possibly the
Mm.
most heartbreaking. So it's really been a shutting down of voice for so many people. And people
Mm.
don't understand that the depression that's caused musicians. And I say this to perhaps even your listeners, if the weather is better, have a couple of musicians come to your terrace, just allow them the space to perform. Don't just give them the exposure, please give them a token honorarium, but call them over, have betucks at home. Let's go back to the older style of
Mm.
betucks where 20 people come and really soak in the music. It's important for your own soul, it's important for the musician's soul. You'll be supporting the arts. Just do it.
So, finally, we're all about the holistic experience and leaving listeners with something to really think about over the weekend. In these strange times, Sonam, what is your one message?
I was talking to a friend just yesterday, so I think I'm going to make that the message. And I was talking about how when we were growing up, we had all these prerequisites that we wanted our friends to have. You chose your friends
Mm.
because they were funny, or because they were cool, or the coolest person, or the funniest, or you had different reasons. As I've
Mm.
grown older and I've lived through life in so many different ways, like I said, I've lost both my parents. I've lived through the tsunami. I was underwater. I've lived through the 1984 riots. I think the one thing that we all need to remember, which we don't give enough importance to, and it's underrated, and it really should be the one thing we focus on, is be kind. Kind to everyone around you. You don't own the earth. You are not the, as human beings, we are not the only creatures that are entitled to the earth. So be kind to animals, be kind to the earth. If you understand what
Hmm.
namaste means, I mean, it means I see the divinity in you. And if you can truly live that, it will be very healthy for you, COVID wise as well, but it's really healthy for your soul. And it's
And I think more importantly, just be kind to yourself, Sonam.
absolutely, you're absolutely right. Be kind to yourself. We are so harsh on ourselves. Be kind, allow yourself the space. It's okay if you want to take a day off. It's okay if you feel bad. It's okay, whatever you feel, acknowledge it, accept your flaws, accept that you will sometimes and you won't sometimes. That's the one thing I've realized that in this time, the importance of needing to be kind.
Thank you, Sonam, once again for being part of this conversation, being our first guest on the weekend playlist.
Shivraj, I'm so thrilled and I'm so proud of you for doing these conversations. I think one of the biggest things that can come about, biggest change comes about in society, in life through dialogue. And so thank you for starting the dialogue and keeping the dialogue going.
Introduce us to similar folks you'd like featured by writing to me at shivraj@brevis.in, or even by sending me a voice message. That's right, we're all about hearing from you. You can send your voice messages on +91 962 547 5442. I repeat, +91 962 547 5442. Or you could also send me your number and I can add you to my subscriber list on WhatsApp. Don't forget to keep a lookout for the next big weekend playlist episode. Have a great weekend and the rest of your week.